Hello and welcome to the Interior Design Business, the monthly podcast produced by the interior design community for the interior design community. My name is Jeff Hayward, and today with my co-host Susie Rumbold, Creative Director of Tessuto Interiors, in the wonderful surroundings of the Haverwood showroom here in Clerkenwell, we're exploring ways that designers can work smarter, not harder.
It's a familiar problem. It seems that the only way designers and architects can achieve the quality results that their clients expect is to produce drawings and other information in such detail that there is no room for misinterpretation on site and that nothing could possibly ever go wrong. Yet, despite every detail being carefully documented, some contractors still seem incapable of faithfully executing our designs. And added to this, it can be almost impossible to charge clients for all the time that it takes to produce that information in the first place. But was this always the case, or has something fundamentally shifted? And if so, how can designers do less and still achieve the perfect product for their clients? Welcome to the Interior Design Business.
To work out how we got here and what designers can do to solve the problem, we're delighted to be joined today by Matt Freeman, Director at Freeman Studio and President of the British Institute of Interior Design, and Anna Burles, Creative Director and founder of London-based studio Run for the Hills. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Before we begin, can you both give us a brief introduction to yourselves and your businesses? Anna, would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. So we are 11 years in and we are a husband and wife duo. So it's myself on the interior side and my husband is graphics, branding and art. So we do everything. We do commercial and residential. In a restaurant, my team will design the interiors, my husband's team will design the brand, the logo, the signage, the menu, the cookbook, all of those kind of things, but resi as well. So
fantastic. And Matt?
And I'm the current president of the British Institute of Interior Design, and I have my own studio, Freeman Studio. I'm an interior designer for residential and, I suppose, smaller commercial, with a focus on circular design.
And I think you have a background in much bigger projects as well, don't you? Having worked for some large practices in the past.
Yes, I've worked for 20 years across various different projects, lots of different types: hospitality, commercial, residential. Some very big, maybe like 130 million, down to dressing and styling bookcases on projects. So I've worked across a really varied scope.
Anna, what about the sort of projects? What's the breadth of what you...
I would say we are probably we're more of a boutique really. We've just completed two hotels in Switzerland, which are 130 keys each, where we did everything: the bedrooms, the social spaces, the restaurants, the bar, absolutely everything. So they're our biggest projects. But normally Heartland would be casual dining, restaurants, bars, cocktail bars, boutique cinemas, that kind of thing.
So just kick off the discussion. How do you think the designer's role, or in fact has the designer's role, changed since the millennium?
When I started at university, we were hand drawing everything, and at the end of university, which was 2003, we just started using CAD. And I think from there to today, there's massive jumps. So I suppose you have BIM modeling, which is what I did when I was in the larger architectural practice, which everything is in 3D. You can use really good tools like clash detection, so you can see where things collide with other things, and it brings you a list, so you can check that the interfaces between things are not hitting each other.
So you don't try and put a radiator where you've got sockets and switches, for example?
Yeah, that and a lot to do with structure and services.
Yeah.
And then it's good for scheduling things out. So if this chair, for example, had a code, you can say how many of those chairs are in the project and it will schedule them out. And then you can put prices next to them, specifications, and it can generate a spec for it. So it helps QSs sort of quantify projects, which is the whole idea of it. So you've got a better idea of how much the project's going to cost in the end. And then I suppose things like CGIs, because that, I don't know where CGIs were at the noughties, early noughties, but now
Whose remit they
augmented reality and things like that, I think that's progressed massively. So.
And Anna?
Same really. I'm obviously working for much smaller companies than where Matt started his career. So I would say we've had a sort of trajectory, which is really interesting. So in the early days of the business, we were probably working on smaller residential projects and very small, maybe more creative workspaces, the HQ for Audible, for example, Amazon company, or advertising agencies. And they wouldn't necessarily have a project manager. They certainly wouldn't have a QS. So you felt the need to create a dossier of information. you kind of felt alone, really, apart from a building manager, possibly. You felt quite alone, so felt the pressure to create that documentation. And it would be CAD, actually. I've always worked in CAD, because by the time I graduated, well, yeah, I started hand drawing, but by the end, everything was in CAD. But then as we've kind of progressed, I think the expectation just has got greater for us to not only do the drawing package in 2D in CAD, but possibly SketchUp, 3D modelling, certainly CGIing, photoreal CGIs, rendered elevations. You know, the deliverables in terms of graphics are great, as well as the details in terms of CAD.
Yeah, because clients want to be able, if they're investing lots of money, they want to be able to see what they're going to get for their money.
Or certain clients can't read CAD drawings, so they need to see the visuals.
Have designers become more professional the more they've used CAD systems?
I can't imagine having done a project hand drawing personally. No. Now that we're using CAD, the ability to copy, paste, delete, go back, change an iteration, manage revisions, the time that it must have taken to do that by hand, I imagine would have prevented some of the quite necessary, sometimes it's a client required change, sometimes it's a value engineered required change, sometimes it's a design initiated change, isn't it, to improve the design. You work out a way it's better.
Moment that you can do it better. Exactly.
Absolutely, but you can do that. So yes, I've always imagined that pre-CAD, that possibly interior designers, if we were in the world of architecture, and you know, that obviously architects trained for 7 years, and we've always possibly felt like the other industry, haven't we? I think CAD projected us into a more professional sphere.
We were a bit the poor relation, I think, and you're right. It's sort of it's pushed us out into the open, and I mean it's been beneficial because it's given us a seat at the top table. But you know, I wonder whether it's all for the greater good.
But there is the sort of technical side of it as well. So the internet was only just starting at the beginning of the 2000s as well. So you've got things like Pinterest, so you don't have to cut magazines up anymore, take photographs, scan them in, and then
sourcing.
The sourcing, the pool to source from would have been so much smaller, whereas now there's so many options.
Sure. I mean, my business goes back 30 years, and you know, so I am pre-internet. You know, I remember the biggest, most important piece of kit in the office was the fax machine. But you know, you used to source out of catalogues, and if the drawing in the catalogue wasn't quite what you were thinking, or you needed to, there wasn't a dimension that you needed, you used to phone them up and say, "I'm looking at part number XXXX. Can you tell me what the projection is from the countertop to the tap hole, or whatever it happened to be?" And as a consequence, we all used a really small group of suppliers. So you had your sort of favoured suppliers because they were the ones that were helpful generally, and they were trusted, and the rest of them you just didn't bother with.
Whereas obviously today, depending on the budget that you may have on a project, if you've got carte blanche and it's a really nice budget, you're probably going to be sourcing and specifying from very nice suppliers who you would hope are still very helpful and have all of that information. I have worked on projects where the budget's been very tight in the extreme. They may not look it when they're photographed, they look lovely, and they are lovely. But if you're buying something off you know, the internet or from a supplier you've not worked with before, a lot of that information may be missing, and the projection is absolutely not what it is on the sketch drawing, and it can cause all kinds of untold problems. In a bathroom, for example, it just simply doesn't stretch quite far enough into the sink, so that there's lots of splashing, and it's just not a nice experience. It's not your fault as a designer, but you feel that it will be perceived that way.
Yeah, and it's a quality
thing. It's the price point and a quality point.
Yeah, I think quality, when things turn up and you're like, oh, I have to send that back because it's not
if there's time to send it back.
Well, yeah, but then you should always go and try and see things.
You get stung for a 25% restocking charge, etc., etc.
Yeah, but I think the sustainable side of it as well. There's so much more information out there. When you want to ask about fabrics or how something's made, where has it been transported from, that whole world of information is there. So as interior designers, you've got to choose materials, you've got to choose them sustainably, you've got to think about how long they last. Are they fit for purpose? There's so many things to think about. So I do think interior designers, the role has probably got much bigger since the beginning of
I think 2000s. I would say it's spread in width, but also in depth.
Yeah. And responsibility from things. Yeah. Because you wouldn't, I don't know, you would have had all the slip resistances to the nth degree like you have them now. I think a lot of that is very complex, and there's a lot to think about, which is why you have massive teams on projects.
How often do designers find themselves revising and reissuing their information, Anna?
All the time, and more than you ever want to. And it's just it's the bête noire, isn't it, of the costing and the estimating and the, you know, mapping out the project phase.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would all, when we put in a fee proposal, you allow for a certain number of revisions.
Absolutely.
And it might be 3, 4, 5, however many revisions you've allowed for, and it's always going to be double plus what you've allowed for, without question, in my experience.
Without question, and sometimes even more. And there are all kinds of reasons, aren't there? It could be value engineering, it's costs, the designs had to change, the plan for it's had to change, the different contractor doesn't work in that way, so you have to change it. Sometimes it's what
specified didn't work.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All of those things, but sometimes it's just client changing their minds as well.
But then you
or
should
other stakeholders changing their minds.
Yeah, but you should be able to charge for that if it's
You should.
changing. But then you don't want to be
should.
petty,
No.
saying, "Oh, I'll charge you for this little thing," and then you kind of give a little bit. So you don't want to jump. You don't want to go in.
Otherwise, you end up being like those terrible contractors that sort of nickel and dime clients to death by, you know, charging for every additional screw. It leaves a nasty taste, and I don't think you can maintain your client relationship under those sorts of
Which is
circumstances.
the most important thing. You need to make sure they're happy, and if you do look like you're trying to nickel and dime them, then they'll just get annoyed. So it's maintaining that relationship.
So isn't it? Because sometimes I'll look at, I don't know, about your title block and you've got your revisions tracked. So we'll have our revisions tracked. And in the past, I might have said that it's revision 3 and it's maybe a summary of what it was. But actually, we'll put more detail these days just so it's obvious whether it's a client request or a contractor request or whatever, just so we can track how many were genuine, how many were we really should have gone back and requested, you know. And they're just in reams sometimes on certain drawings. And if you calculate the time that it would have taken that designer to do all of those changes, you look back at the scope of work, the costing and the time allocated, it's just off the scale in certain instances.
And in the olden days, before we had the CAD systems, you simply wouldn't have done them because you couldn't possibly have hand-drawn the thing that many times.
What would you add to that, Matt?
I would add about private clients at the moment. What I tend to do is tell them when we're making a change and that we're going to let that go as a freebie and just keep track of them. And then when you get to a point, you say, we're going to have to start charging for these things because we've done all of these items and we've got to that point now that the kindness, gesture. The goodwill is past. And
but if it's something that you're changing because you see a better way of doing it and therefore you're improving the design, how can you go, that's design development, but you can't go back and say to the client, we're going to charge you for that.
No, I don't think you can go back and do it. You give them a quote and say, to make that change, it's this much. So on the projects at the moment...
Even if it's something they haven't asked for?
No, I was going to say on a recent project where they've chosen a fabric and we've ordered it, then they've changed their mind. They would say, can I change it for something else? And you say, let's just look into what's happening and the status of it. You've already placed the order. The fabric's on its way. If you want to change it, you've got to pay for that fabric and another fabric, and the time frame for that is another 8 weeks for that fabric to get to the upholsterers. So you give them a full picture of what it is and how much it's going to be to make that change, and then it's up to them what they want to do. But yeah.
So what I'm hearing here is that there's a change management system that needs to be in place so that you're tracking and recording those changes as you make them. But that is also not terribly easy when you're dealing with a young team.
It isn't. They don't think to do it. No. So, for example, my team will report out, this is the 8th change this week. And I'll say, well, is the client aware that we've made 7 changes gratis? Oh, no, we haven't mentioned it, but now we feel it's enough now. We can't go back to the client if we haven't gently let them know. Happy to subsume this, it's a half an hour change or a 15 or 20-minute change, but when it suddenly becomes a whole extra day of CAD, but it's tricky if they haven't said anything. So
I think that comes down to, I suppose, you making them aware at the beginning of the project, and you know you've got this amount of time to complete this work. Then if you go over that, you go above, you make these changes, this is a consequence of those changes. And then I suppose you have to say there is a bit of leniency, we can do these things, but you won't be getting a pay rise or you won't be getting a bonus or anything if you spend all of the profit and you don't make any money on the project.
It's a painful process though, isn't it? Because
when you're learning,
but also not many designers come into it for the commercial aspect. They are doing it for the love of design. They're creatives at heart, and it's just not the way they tick.
Yeah.
So, and I find it tough having to be not bad cop, but you have to kind of bring it back to the commercial
I find
side of
myself
the business.
stuck between a rock and a hard place when, you know, one of my designers, I'll look over and I'll see that they're working and saying, didn't you finish and issue that already? Oh, yes, but I've just, you know, I've had this fantastic idea. So do you say, stop,
No.
go back to what you've already done? If it really genuinely is a fantastic idea, shouldn't you be pushing the envelope and making that as good as it
Which
can
could
be?
make all the difference. It makes it even more award-winning, and it's a fantastic project. It's really tricky, isn't it? But the trickiest situation we find is where there are multiple stakeholders. So whether it's husband and wife commercial team, you know, of our restaurant team, and you haven't received the joined up feedback. So you've enacted changes, and then someone very important comes in who has an entirely different view. And you know, it's really difficult in that scenario when they've been a repeat client, they're really good to you in lots of other ways. Do you dig your heels in and say it's a rebrief? Or do you say, can we just try and make sure we have everything now and we just hit it in one go? It can be really tricky.
Yeah, so I have a briefing document to sit down with clients, and that's what I say from the beginning, that whoever's in the meetings has to be the person that signs it off and agrees it. There's no point in me talking to X and then Y signs it off, and then I have to justify that to them.
We do say
because
that
we
too,
don't have time for going backwards and forwards, because you're going to hold the project up. So
No, and we always ask people who's the decision maker. When we do a briefing document, we always make sure that that's documented.
Yeah.
Because in residential projects, you get a husband and wife team, and even in this enlightened age, it's often the wife who's having fun doing the design, and then the husband turns around and says, "I'm not paying for that,"
Yeah.
and you've wasted the time. And then you make her cross because anything you show her after that, she won't like, because she's still got the dream in her head. But even on commercial projects, quite often, as you said, they're a partnership, and you'll have one who sees themselves as the creative and the other one who's the money bags.
Yeah.
And so you have to have the money, you have to take the money bags with you.
Yeah, you do. So you can't entirely say, I thought we'd agreed that, you know, X part of the partnership was the decision maker. You still have to make them feel heard, don't you? So it's a really tricky balance, isn't it? Really. And you don't want to be the voice of boring doom, not doom, but just, you don't want to be the bean counter with the team as well, because you have to keep their spirits up and you have to inspire them, and they have to still love the design. I still love the design process. I want to design the most amazing project. You just also have to then balance we've got a fee structure here and you've got a time structure here, and just trying to get those two to talk to each other.
Which do you think's worse, commercial clients or resi clients for this sort of change?
Depends on the size of the project.
Moving the goalposts.
Depends on the size of the project and how many people you're dealing with in terms of the change. Because if it's a simple change on a resi project and you're changing a carpet from one thing to another, but if it's a big commercial project and then you're changing a carpet for an entire floor, there's QS you've got to speak to, you might have to update your drawings. There's so many knock-on effects of it, whereas something small is an easy change. And you can say, we've not ordered it, it's an extra £1,000 to make the change. Fine. But if it's a commercial project, it's a lot more people involved in coming to a decision and agreeing. So
it just varies, doesn't it? It really varies. I'd say probably more complex on the commercial side. Also with value engineering, which is another huge area of change requests, isn't it? Getting the project, for example, at the moment we try and encourage clients, and if they have a QS or a project manager who might act in that capacity, or just a team leader, to just early QS the design development elevations and the early ideas of the spec. Let's just get a cost going, because based on what that spits out, let's just design something that we can achieve, rather than we all absolutely love what we're coming out with. And then you can't afford it. And then there's a huge amount of revisions, but not every client and not every commercial operator is happy to do that early QS.
No, I'm always astonished. We say to clients, you know, for a few £100 in the scheme of things, we could get a QS to cast an eye over this, and it would just give you some surety. And the number of them that said, "Oh no, I don't need that." It's extraordinary. To me, it makes so much sense. It's money so well invested at the outset.
And that's your caveat, isn't it? When we get to this point and we have to VE and we have to reassure our drawings, then we told you so.
Do the design tools that you're now using lead to a higher standard of design?
I think through tools like SketchUp and 3D modeling, you can resolve a lot of the details, and you can get the designers to really think about junctions and how things meet other things.
Just how things feel in perspective too.
Yeah.
Same with CGIs, actually. We've made some quite critical decisions over finishes by creating a photoreal image of the space. It needs to feel fresher. So ditch the wood floor, we're going to go with a really poppy tile, and it's just transformed it. And they would have been quite difficult decisions to have made off a finishes spec and a CAD drawing package.
Yeah, to get the client to buy into it. Yeah, so
whereas they saw it, they
2000
felt it. Here's one, here's where we are. What do you think about this? A simple change actually in a CGI. So it was a really, really amazing tool. Or just eye lines and sight lines. You know how you can't possibly know from a CAD drawing pack when you walk into a space, just there may be a piece of cabinetry that just spoils everything. You see it in 3D and you know that's going to happen straight away.
Yeah.
Just transitions and eye lines.
Yeah.
So they are amazing tools actually. So I would say on balance they massively improve. They just add though, don't they? They're adding to our scope, adding to our time.
Yeah, I was going to say then the opposite of that. I worked on the Southern Justice Centre, and we built a full-size courtroom for a police station. We did Crown Courts, Magistrates Courts, and Civil Courts, but we built it full scale in a theatre, and then we had the judges come in and everybody come in and sit around the room so they could make sure the sight lines worked. Because I don't know how you could model that, and you want them to buy into the design. So we got them all in and they all sat in all of the positions.
Were they dressed up?
No. But yeah, but something like that, that's physically, which is amazing to say that they built it to scale.
And actually, the technology wasn't helping you there. You actually needed a physical model.
Yeah, and you couldn't explain that. You can show them a visual saying that's what you would see, but you're like, can I see their eyes, which is what they want to do. So, yeah.
But I think the other thing that the technology allows you to do is, as you mentioned it, Matt, is just all those junction details. Whereas, you know, being absolutely crystal clear in your information about how you want that niche set out.
Yeah.
You know, are the tiles going that way or are they going that way? It's just...
But that's people's passions. That, you know, that, oh, that's mine.
Yes.
How these things go together, how does that look, how does that interface with that? That's the bits that I like doing, and you're like, right, you can have that now because I'm happy that this has happened, and yeah.
But if you've got a shell and core or a very, you know, linesy structured kind of space, empty space, and you're putting things into it, you can have that control. If you're refurbishing an existing space, depending on the strip and how accurately that's been done and how accurately the builder's survey subsequently has been done and communicated back to you, all kinds of things can go wrong with those junctions and transitions on site.
Yeah.
And it's those decisions, isn't it? Whether if you have a good team, they'll call you and say, it's not quite working, and it could be that the wall, it looked straight on the survey, it's not straight, it's not in reality. We have an issue, do you want to come down to site? Should we problem solve it together? Brilliant, if you can. Or I've photographed it in several different ways. I think it could be this or this. What do we think? And you brainstorm it. But that's a good scenario, isn't it? There are lots of scenarios where that conversation is not had.
No.
And something is just forced into a...
Like WhatsApp, you know, just to be able to send someone a picture of something on your phone.
Rather be bothered, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Oh yes, but the fact that you don't have to go to site now, that somebody can actually send you 2 or 3 pics on your phone, and you can go. They go, look, we've encountered this. What do we do? And you kind of go, oh yeah, I can see what they mean. Maybe we could do X, Y. Will that work? You know, phone them up.
Which I guess in the past you'd have had to drop down to site, wouldn't you? But that could have been 2 or 3 hours, depending on where site was, or longer. So, and then how would that have worked in terms of fee charging?
Do you think the drive for this quality drive is influenced by client expectations, or how much of it's coming from us and how much of it's coming from them?
I think in my heart, we have definitely client expectations. Often there is no architect on our projects. They just deem that we are capable of doing it, and that the quality of our drawing packs, which are not they are not construction drawing packs, they are very detailed design intention packs. However, a lot of the subbies or the contractors or the joinery makers, they will work from our drawings, which of course is a bit of a danger, and you don't want that to be the case, and you want to get shop drawings back. It doesn't always happen. So I think the lack of let's say really technical knowledge PM who may have been an architect, for example, in the past, and you work together and you just get your drawing pack into shape, don't you? And you problem solve all of those kind of things. The lack of that layer on our projects means that the expectation is that we fill that void somehow. But I also think there's a fear of things going wrong and of liability. Right. And having to pay for things that may go wrong. So you try and do your utmost to avoid anything going wrong. Not that it would be your fault if it did, because it could be a misinterpretation of a drawing or the lack of a decent survey or whatever, but any number of things, but you try and avoid it by over-delivering on the detail.
Do you think it's clients or designers?
What I tend to do is do benchmarking, so send over examples of the quality that I think the client deserves and that meets the budget. But then that's the thing, if you've not got a QS on board, you can show them those things and then it might be lower. But going shopping and looking at furniture and saying this is where your budget will get you, and then you manage their expectations. And if they're thinking,
But I actually think that because people travel and stay in 5-star hotels and go to beautiful restaurants and things, their expectations are, they're much more design savvy than they were 20 years ago. Whereas once upon a time, a beautiful bathroom might have just been a fabulous vanity unit with a nice marble top. Now we are expecting all those niches and the joints and the junctions and the hidden lights and all the little details and the shadow gaps, all those things. They're almost seen as standard, particularly with any high-end projects, certainly. And I think that that's also because clients see it and because we can deliver it, we've shot ourselves in the foot a bit.
as long as you've designed to do that level of detail, or your fee covers that level of detail, then
it's fine.
yeah. But that's what I mean by showing examples of what.
How do you know what you're going to be detailing when you put your fee proposal together?
I think usually
How
because
exciting a project do you think it's going to be?
I think when you look at the project, I would estimate based on the individual projects and what the finishes are based on the discussions that we've had. So if they want stone in the bathrooms, you know that it's going to be expensive.
What if there is no telling? It's for us to come up with that. We don't actually get told any of those things.
But then you've got to have some sort of idea. I suppose if you're putting a percentage on for your fee and you say the overall bill cost will have 12% of that, so
we obviously charge differently. We don't do percentages. Just from I mean, everybody actually we charge slightly differently on. You know, it's a learning process charging as well, isn't it?
Clients can cheat on that too. I know of a project, I was not involved in it, thank goodness, where the stone budget on this, it was a big house in Mayfair, and the stone budget was several £million, and the client, several, not seven, several. And the client said, oh, no, we're taking all that stone out of the package. So the designer who was charging on a percentage basis lost that money.
Sure.
And then the contracts were signed, and then the client added it all back in.
Oh, cheeky.
That is
Little
very
bit by little bit. No, and knowing full well exactly what he was doing. This was so premeditated.
Charge your percentage on.
I'm not.
It's in your contract.
I don't know how the contract was structured, but it just meant that the client and then the designer ended up doing all that work and wasn't actually paid for it. So you know that's not hard and fast either. I know a lot of designers now are only quoting to RIB at the end of RIBA stage 2, so concept design, and then they say to their clients, once we've established,
we know we're designing,
then we will give you the fee proposal.
Sometimes they won't take
They don't like it because they want, if they're planning a project, they want to know what
they want to have an idea of what the on cost might be. So again, I try and do range prices beyond that. It could be indicative.
Yeah.
Oh, I want something, you know, it's really tricky.
What about this increase in the level of detail? Has it changed how you work with contractors?
Again, it really depends on the contractor. So if there's a real goodie, if there's a real goodie, I know, well, and they have all the trades in house. Let's say they have joinery, they have metalwork, they have, you know, so let's say on a bar or restaurant project, you know, there's so much custom joinery, and the integration of all of those things. If you have a goodie, they just know their stuff, and they'll bring people to roundtable meetings, and you go through your drawing packs, and you know you're problem solving and brainstorming in the moment, and the more meetings you have together, the more detailed the handover of the pack I find, the better. But what if the trades are split? You know, there is a contractor notionally, but M&E is being done by someone else, joinery is being done by someone else, electrical's being done by someone else. So there's a notional, but it's really, really difficult. And that's where I find that it becomes very difficult, the coordination process. And that's where we start having to become even more involved in nagging and requesting information about.
Orchestrate it, don't you? You have to make sure that
everybody's packs. Can you check
the contractor?
In a way, yes, and it can be truly maddening, and I'm not sure clients understand that. And there could have been a cost reason why it was simpler to split those trades, but it never works to the benefit of the project, and it certainly doesn't work for the interior designer.
Yeah, the recent residential project I worked on, the details that were more complicated, we had them made in full size for each of the finishes.
A prototype, great.
So we had maybe 7 or 8 for the project of all the difficult details that they weren't sure whether they would work, which they all did work in the end. But I think they were, I suppose, created through CAD and through SketchUp. And we're like, can you do this? Because we think it'll look gorgeous. And then they go, oh, okay. And then, yes, is the answer. But that was a higher end project. So they have the budget to do those things, which is always good to work on those projects.
So are there any other ways that it might have changed the contractor's role? Do you think they're, do they rely too heavily on us?
If it's a design and build contract, then that's slightly different. If you can do your technical specs and give them the finishes for them to match, and they can put in contractors' proposals, and then you give it over to them, and then they're responsible for the finished product, but you've given your design intent, then that might, if they can bring somebody in like a specialist who's specific about, like we're working on another project where the lead contractor was a joinery company, and it was a lot of joinery, so they looked at it completely differently and came with lots of solutions rather than a construction contractor.
Yes, I know what you mean.
And then they would approach it in a different way again. So having someone that's within that specialism of what's the majority of the project, then that's usually a better place to start if you can request that. Don't know if you get very far, but try.
So it varies on every project, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The quality of the team that you end up
Yeah,
working
no,
with,
absolutely.
and how hands-on the client is as well. Because actually, I've got particularly one client at the moment. She's just so impressive. She knows everything about everything, M&E,
Amazing.
extract, just everything. She's so hands-on, and actually that's fabulous because she'll pick up on things rather than us worrying about integration or coordination. She's on those things too. So we'll give a little nudge occasionally, but it's much less work. But that's very rare and unusual.
And does it put more pressure on you, some of these issues that we've described with contractors, to actually do more?
It does, particularly coordination. Going back to the fact that there may not be an independent project manager on all of our projects. Often there isn't. But I'm thinking of a residential project. There was an architect. There's a lead contractor, but we'd got the client to engage a lighting designer. There was a separate joinery firm brought in, not under our wing, but recommended by us because they're really great. But there was no pure project manager, so you're just constantly thinking, well, if the lighting designer, have they finished their we've come up with the initial concept, but then they've developed it, have they finished that? Because if they haven't finished that, then we know that first fix is coming soon, and if that doesn't, then you just know the process, and you know what's going to really get in the way of your coolest
You
idea.
fall into the role of it.
So you fall into the role of it. You think this was nowhere in the fee.
But I think interior designers have this chronic inability not to over-deliver. We're just
so true.
it's
people pleasing.
we're so people pleasing. And I think the other thing is that because a lot of the guys on site can't or won't make a decision, the impetus is back onto you to actually nut out that detail and give them the instruction.
Even when it may not be your specialty as well. It's a very complex, yes.
My most recent experience was with a very good contractor, and he was into everything, and he would come with lots of solutions to things. So I had a very good experience recently.
Yeah.
So it was lovely. Yeah.
Do you think clients' expectations have also changed? And does this come down to a fundamental misunderstanding about the role of the interior designer?
Not necessarily, because I think I usually speak to them and brief them at the beginning and explain exactly what everyone's doing. But then when you do start working with them and you start raising things, they're like, oh, I didn't know you think about that, or you thought about that. And they come back with lots of issues that we've resolved, and I can answer all of the questions. So I think we meet their expect. I don't know what I'm talking about. Sorry, my brain's gone floop. You can do this, and then I might butt in after. That's my point.
Yeah, from my experience, there's a lot of confusion about the role of the interior designer and where we sit vis-a-vis an architect. So for the BID, I did a paper with Lester Bennett. We actually did a paper trying to explain the areas of overlap, because there are lots of areas of overlap between us and architects, from everything from the spatial design to door openings, window openings, joinery, transitions. They are areas of overlap, but where there are both parties on a project, there are still very defined roles. And as long as you have a kind of drawing issue list or a matrix of responsibilities, which says who's the lead on doing that drawing, and is there some input from us? Because actually some joined up thinking is where the magic happens, because we're about creating a home or a space that people are going to be in and socialise and be within. And I see it as quite a fundamentally different role. So there are areas of overlap, but I found it really difficult sometimes, even with that document that me and Lester put together, to explain to clients the difference between us and an architect, and where our role may start and stop, and where really, I'll give you an example in a minute, really where an architect needs to take over. So I, for example, found myself under a huge amount of pressure on one restaurant project where the project manager, who had been an architect previously, wanted me to do the setting out drawing for all of the walls within the space. So we had done a GA, it was an empty space. We had shown walls, but we'd requested what depth and thickness they should be, because we're not creating the build-ups and we're not drawing the walls. We'd plotted the bar and the restaurant and the back office and the dry store and the cold store, everything, but wanted me to create the actual construction setting out.
build-ups?
Yeah, not the drawing of the wall build-ups, but to define the setting out for the builders to start creating the walls. And I said, well, how can I possibly do that? I don't know how you're going to construct the walls. I don't know whether they're going to be chunky and cheap or thin and more expensive. I know there are different types, but it's just not my training. I can't possibly. He said, I need you to do it. So I fretted over, I got kind of bullied into it, really. So I talked to a few friends over the weekend, business owned architectural friends, and they just, the advice I got, I mean, at the time, it was just so awful. I'm thinking about my liability, my insurance, is to just plot the centre line.
I was just going to say the centre line.
Plot the centre line.
Yeah.
So you do whatever happens after that, and the knock-on effect that may then have within the available space within each. But it was highly political, and it was really, really difficult. Created a problem in the relationship, which we got over, and we ended on a really good positive note. But there was a fundamental misunderstanding about.
But I think
what
it
my role
comes
should
down,
be.
the architect may not have included for the setting out drawing, so he's looking for someone else he can shove that onto too.
Well, there wasn't an architect. That was
Oh,
the
there
point.
wasn't an
There
architect. Right, got it.
And they didn't want to pay for one to do what
So
you...
I said, hire an architect. I'll happily collaborate with an architect, so they can come up with their setting out, and I will see what impact that has on our general GA. Just like you to do it, please.
Yeah, because you get into the realms of choosing a specific partition type, and it depends what the floor and ceiling height is,
Builder,
and then you're liable
Installations.
for that. Then yeah.
acoustics.
Yeah, all of it.
At that point, Anna, could you have the conversation to say, you can pay us for that, to do that
And then
drawing?
subcontract to an architect or a technician,
Yes.
architectural technician.
At the time, I said, well, if you don't want to engage an architect, I could do that. Just it could come under our. I just want you to do it by Monday morning. Just sort it out.
Impression.
And did you charge for it?
I mean, because we were plotting the centre line, it didn't take that much time.
No, that's
Yeah.
true. Okay, fair point. Matt, you mentioned coordination before. Do you put a section into your fee proposals to cover off some time for coordinating with other
Yes.
team members?
Yeah. So it depends. The team is in subcontractors.
Wider
or,
design team.
If you know you're dealing with an architect and a structural engineer and an M&E consultant, for example, do you have a chunk in your fee proposal that says we're allowing X amount to deal with all these guys and the toing and froing?
Yeah. So regular meetings with them. Yeah. So I've got time
And
for that.
the
And that's
emails in
usually
between.
it's usually a senior person to oversee what's happening, and then junior time for chasing things and day-to-day running of projects. Yeah.
Because I think that's something that maybe some designers forget to include for.
I've tried to have a. Obviously, it's the stage, pre-production fabrication stage, show 3 to 5 actually, isn't it? But then through the life of the pre-production phase as well, I've tried to have a kind of allocated amount per month
I think
to allow for being able to go back and say with 45 emails and counting with joinery firm or whoever or the
Yeah.
combination.
And I always think of it as if it's time I have to go and sit somewhere else to do it, then it's separate time. If you're doing it while you're doing other things, then not so much. But if you can actually say, I sat and I did emails for 1 hour on this morning, caught up on everything, then you could charge them. So I make sure I go and sit and I just focus on that project's emails and make sure you get through them all. And try and check emails first thing in the morning and after lunch, and then don't look unless someone rings. Because otherwise you get bogged down answering emails all day and it's like never-ending trail. So yeah.
So the level of detailing, a lot of it's about not wanting to get sued. It's about not wanting to have to pay for expensive mistakes that you might be deemed liable for.
Absolutely, all of that, but also wanting it to be an amazing case study.
Of course.
Because let's say if it's residential, no one else may see that property. The
True.
client's happy, it's photographed beautifully, friends see it, but otherwise. But you still want it to be amazing, don't you? Because you still want to have the word of mouth and you want to have the testimonial. A commercial project, a bar or restaurant in the centre of Soho that everyone's going to go to, and every prospective new client is also going to go and visit to see what the level of finish is like. So the pressure is on for even if, because if the level isn't there, despite your drawings, despite your best efforts, despite, people will still think that you as a designer didn't
do the right
care
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you might not get sued, but actually
It's not, yeah, it's reputation.
Yeah.
So the fear is there, and that's why you will over deliver, over check, over engage with the contractor to try and make sure that they involve you rather than freezing you out.
is there anything else that designers and architects can do to help contractors?
What we've been trying to experiment with is just more collaboration. Getting the design pack, the design intentions to a point, not to final stage, end of stage 4 drawings. Before that, getting it to a good stage of 3, early doors in RIBA stage 4. A developed concept, a drawing pack, elevations, some initial sketch joinery details, for example, and just meeting on site if there's been some development in terms of the partitions or just the spaces, and workshopping together on site.
These are the finishes. This is what we're expecting them to look like, again, when they meet each other. And this is the setting out. And if you see anything that doesn't look like this, then please ring us and ask us. Don't finish it and send me a photo and say this looks rubbish.
The only thing is, if you haven't documented it, when they actually get to site, you do your workshop, and then, 6 weeks later they're actually installing it. Have they forgotten? Or the guy that you talked to has gone sick and it's someone else there?
Sure, so then obviously it needs following up, doesn't it? And I guess you're drawing to the outcomes from the workshop. You're then doing the next layer. But you're right, the person who was problem solving with you may not be on site. So then again, you can find yourself going down to site more than maybe you'd factored into the project as well, just to make sure that things are being done correctly.
But CGI's for showing site as well and talking. So that's what we usually do, is talk through the presentation that you give to the client. This is what we're looking to achieve. This is how it's going to look. Here's a CGI, I'll print it off, pop it on the wall. And that's what we're trying to achieve, and get them into it and get them understanding what the goal is and the quality level.
It does really
and
help.
carry them along with it, and then show the materials, and then
Yeah, the expectation and certainly the materiality, the production values. We find that CGIs, where we've done CGIs, photoreal, really good ones, the quality at the end is so much better, because everybody understands the aspiration that you want the vintageness of the wood to look like that, whereas a finisher's spec and a CAD drawing cannot always
it's not
communicate
that engaging.
The problem is, of course, that can work for commercial clients because they're often willing to pay for the CGIs because there's a huge cost associated with the production of CGIs, because they can use them in their marketing materials.
Marketing as well.
All that stuff, sales brochures, we've done big resi, blocks of flats and things where they've used our CGIs for their brochures and their website and all that stuff. And that works fine. But you're never going to get that for residential, or very, very rarely will you get that for resi. I mean, you may have worked on some very high-end ones where you've done them, where you have done them, but generally speaking, not.
It tends to be rendered elevations and then images of the furniture. But again, it's still explaining it to the contractor and explaining what's the most important details. Don't tell them the generic things. Let them do that and give them some ownership. But this bit, I want it to be exactly that.
Right, so picking out those things that are the must-haves, and maybe letting a little bit of the other slide.
Well, because you don't want to teach them how to suck eggs, and it's like, I'm just saying this is the most important bit. The rest, up to you. You've got the drawings, but it's these key things.
It is. So I did a patchwork floor. There were multiple different designs of tiles, and it was like iteration number 8 that I was happy with. And I literally took the boxes of tiles and I labelled them on the back with a marker pen. And they were in like A's, B's, C, D, and the tiler wanted to, no joke, kill me when I turned up with these boxes and the things. Felt condescended to, and I understood that, and I just tried to be as warm and friendly as I could and said, I've just tried to trying to make your life easier, and I know, and I really hope you're not feeling. Anyway, by the end, it looked amazing, obviously, but it would have been done wrong. I mean, 100% it would have been done wrong. And then how do you go back from that? Do you have to order the tiles again? They're on a 6-week lead time. The client doesn't want to pay. Anyway, by the end, he was really grateful, but it was a process, and it was just...
But how long did it take you to sit on the floor and label with a Sharpie at the backs of all those tiles?
Early days of the career, it needed to look knockout.
Anna, you've got to give me an example of working less, not working more.
Okay, so where we are, because we do need to do that. We absolutely do need, as a business, we need to do that. We're working on you know, big complex projects, and our drawing packs are just more detailed than they've ever been, you know, so we do have to work smarter. So what I'm trying to work on at the moment are some educational type documents for our clients and the contractors, which show the different levels of detail in the early part of the process. So for example, I've got a document that is even just GAs, you know, what level of detail do you have on your GAs? How covered in dimensions is it? Are we doing breakouts? You know, are we doing ceiling heights? Are we you know, just what's the, do you want A, do you want B, or do you want C? Because if you want C, I need to work out how to charge for C. Joinery, there's a sketch level of joinery. Sketch, so, you know, there's a, you know, an elevation aside, a plan, and then there's a working drawing, and they are a world apart in terms of the time it takes to do. So I've got a document that says, do you want this, this, or this? Same with signage. Do you want us to just come up with the idea for it and a kind of, you know, an elevation, or do you want us to actually kind of put together the finisher's spec and the actual kind of, you know, the detailed technical plan? So making it visual is helping the clients to understand the different levels of detail, whereas they would just say, well, it's just a joinery pack.
But going back to your example of the numbered floor, you didn't know when you put your fee proposal together that, and I take it that it was the early days of your career, but you didn't know, you wouldn't know now if you were going to end up with a numbered floor in your design when you do that fee proposal.
Of course,
so
I could have chosen big slabs.
You could have, and to make your life easy, you could have just done big slabs, and I'm sure there must be designers out there to do
big slabs.
Big slabs. Remember, do big slabs. That is the solution to all our problems.
Yeah, I just can't do big slabs.
But that's what you were saying about wanting to do a good job and do what's best for the project. You know that would have looked the best. If you'd have put big slabs of grey in.
Just include an extra section perhaps for design development. Are we not front-ending enough in our fees for some of this stuff that we all end up doing? Numbers of revisions, numbers of meetings. But then it comes down to how much of that will the client bear? If your design fee in a competitive situation ends up being double Joe's, and actually, you know, we all know that no two fee proposals are really saying the same thing.
Apples for pears, are they?
They're never apples for pears or apples for apples. But, you know, the client,
Always apples for pears.
they're always apples for pears. That's, yeah. But the clients don't see it, and it's very hard to explain that. And I know I've lost projects because I've priced things honestly, knowing how much time it's going to cost me or take.
And then when I've pitched for things before, you pitch for a show apartment, you win the show apartment, and then they want the presentation that you've pitched for, and that's it. There's no design development. It's literally that's
it. It's almost
it.
like you've done a concept
You've
already.
done that work for nothing. Then you've given your time. You've put the finishes together. You've done that, and then that's it. We'll have that, please. And you're like, okay. And then you're like, oh, but I might have developed it a bit more, and you want to do more, but that's what I'll have. And you're like, okay. But you've done that for free.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing, getting away from doing things for free.
Yes.
Even just £5,000 or £2,000, just something to show willing and to cover costs maybe, rather than spending lots of time doing a lot of work that then you give to them, and they could just as easily take that and ask another designer to do it.
Yeah, so it's really, it's trying to allow for a certain amount of flexibility in the fee from design stage 3 and 4 onwards, but it just really depends on the client.
Yeah, it really totally does. Actually, there was another thing that we've started producing a lot of typical details.
Yes, I was going to say that. Yeah.
What sort of typical details do you typically produce?
So typical details. Bathrooms tend to be thoroughly detailed, but if you can do a niche drawing once with stone, and then you can do different skirting profiles, for example, or floor junction details, you can keep those on the sheets and then just issue the ones that you need for that project. Coving details, wall panelling details.
Setting out.
Yeah, so there's a lot of those ones, and socket setting, out heights.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of that you can use on each project, or sort of pick from what you have.
So there's an initial investment of time because you're building up that library effectively.
But you still want, I don't like the idea that someone's copying and pasting those details as well, because you have to check that detail is specific to that project. So if you've already done it as a typical detail, you go, it's there, but you've got to check the finishes, check the thickness, check the specification, make sure it all aligns. So it's not, from a client's point of view, oh, you've already done that, here you go. If you don't want that, it's there, so we've done the forethought.
But there has to be a piece also, you know, otherwise we'd always just be working for the same, you know, if you were only ever charging for your time, our skill has value. Yes, so the fact that you've done it once and you're reissuing it to another client doesn't mean it doesn't have value. because that's your talent and that's the skill that you're bringing to the project. So you shouldn't give those typical details away for nothing. You should be still going through saying, I'm charging you, 100 quid for that and 100 quid. And do you know what I mean?
Because maybe the project you originally created them for was one of those where the scope just kind of, was off the scale. You do.
So I'm squirreling some of that back. What I was going to say is about juniors as well. So they're the ones that tend to start looking at those details, but they also need to understand how it works. There's no point in them just taking a detail, copying and pasting it. So you're still going to have those conversations about this is how it looks, this is why it's drawn like that, and then maybe they can start drawing other ones. But having that you use all of the time is a good reference for them and a good learning tool as well.
So staff training internally is really important.
Yeah. So when you're walking around site, you can say, what detail is that? And then try and get them to think about the drawing package and locating things. And it's the structure of the drawing package as well, and how you cross-reference everything, not to repeat information. So you've got one sort of succinct location where everything is.
It's all complex, isn't it? And actually, I think it's tough for the juniors actually in today's industry. It's tougher than it maybe was in the past because what we're producing is way more complex.
Yeah, it's a big jump because I'm teaching in Sheffield at the moment on their interior architecture course. And if you think from where they are third years to then being in fully employed, and especially COVID, people are working at home, you need those people in, you need senior people in showing them what to do.
Learning by osmosis,
Yeah.
hearing you on the phone,
So important.
dealing with
Super
situations.
important.
So important.
I understand.
Watching you solve problems. Yep.
Yeah, I understand the sustainability and people travelling and commuting to work, but yeah, it's your career
mix,
and it's
isn't
what
it?
you
It's
need
your
to know.
career.
It's a balance, yeah.
Does this impact staff in any other ways?
It does, because when I was a junior, I was working, I suppose, 40 hours a week. Sometimes it would go to 50, 60, and then I found diaries where I've been doing 67 hours a week, and I really think it's such a bad position to be in, because for those 37.5 hours you're working, you're employed to be your best during that time, and then if you go and do a whole 30 hours on top of it, then those 30 hours, or but the 67, are you actually doing a very good quality of work? And you should just be focusing on those 37.5 hours, and you shouldn't be expected to do lots of overtime. And I got some loo time for some of it, but not all of it, nowhere near, and I've never been paid overtime. But I think a lot of people in the industry feel like they have to work long hours to get the recognition because their career is dependent on them doing it. But as long as if you're doing something really valuable, if you're doing lots of concept work and you can say, I've been doing all these amazing things, but if you sat doing ceiling details for months on end and you're working really long hours, then that's not doing anything for your mental health or your well-being.
It is an industry culture. We do all work ridiculous hours. Always have done.
Yeah.
I would say the senior levels in a company like ours work long hours. That I think there's a fairly healthy, I'd say, the happy medium is somewhere in between, isn't it? I come from many different industries and working ridiculous hours on my way up, and that's just. And now I'm a business owner with my husband, and we work ridiculous. It's what we've always known. Some of the younger members of the, they're quite firm about the hours that they're prepared to do. The more senior level, more ambitious, want to make an impression upon us, want to see themselves progress. They put in the longer hours, and then everyone will pull a late shift sometimes.
Everybody,
Everyone.
But sometimes it's also just again, I think coming back to the slight unreasonableness of expectations or deadlines that can be set on a project. We need that by Wednesday, and you've only been briefed on it on the Monday, but it's going to have such a knock-on effect with the rest of the project that you feel duty bound to.
Yeah, so not agreeing to things without checking the office that you've got time to cover it, and then if you can't meet deadlines, either your staff are not well trained enough to meet the deadlines you've agreed, or the fee was wrong when you've put the fee in originally, and you have to quickly catch up with yourself to get it done. And you have to do that during time that's unbillable because the project can't afford for you to put an extra person on it.
But often this happens when it's an unforeseen change. Suddenly something has to happen by Wednesday, and you only found out about it on Monday.
Yes.
This is not something that generally the interior designer has planned for. It's something that's been inflicted on.
And therefore, you can either say no, dig your heels in, but be very unpopular with the client, or you can try and try and pull it off somehow.
But then you can do, but then if you do it that one time and then it'll go,
There's
and
an
it'll go, and
expectation that you
it's
can
like
handle.
standing
Yes.
your ground or making a massive fuss and being like, for this one time, we will do this for you because you're a valued client, but it will not happen regularly. So we just don't have the capacity, or we can't deliver
That's
the
nice and
project.
firm, isn't he?
I'm not sure we've really solved it.
This is the part of the podcast where we like to ask our guests for a bit of something crazy that's happened to them on site. So this week we'd like to say, well, this month we'd like to say, could you give me an example of the maddest, funniest, worst misinterpretation of a drawing or an instruction you've ever come across on site?
I've had quite a few corkers in terms of joinery recently, where we've angsted over our beautiful design intention drawings, and we've got the angles and the comfort factor of our backrests, and then maybe it's been a project where we haven't had direct access to the joinery firm making that seating. We've requested it, we've been anxious about it, we've wanted to have that access, we wanted to see photographs from the workshop, and then when you get there, it's heartbreaking when you get there and it's just very, very wrong. So one instance where the backrest, honestly, if I didn't know better, it was a mattress. It was literally a mattress that has just been sat on top of the base cushion and wrapped in fabric. It feels as chunky as a single mattress. It probably is a single mattress. Horrifying. And just one of those, just awful, and one of those awful situations where you have to just alert the client to what's happened, and obviously, cover yourself by showing the drawings and the detail and the fact that this is absolutely just how on earth has this happened. But of course, possibly guests are arriving in 3 days' time. What do you do,
We had one with a very, very, very expensive handmade wallpaper, a Dragonnet wallpaper, where despite the fact that we had all the elevations and everything is done to the nth degree, and we have a jib door going through into the kitchen from the dining room, which is going to be covered in this beautiful paper, terribly expensive gold leaf, etc., etc. And the wallpaper contractor decided he was going to go off-piste, didn't bother looking at the drawings and thought, I know, I've got a great idea. I'll show more of the gold on the door. Which meant that nothing else
didn't line up.
Oh,
Beautiful Dragonnet.
It's just, and it was like, yeah.
So then what happened?
Well, so he had to replace the piece of that one
cost.
at his cost. Yeah,
Oh.
but
Just
it was just.
We've also had,
heartbreaking.
you go into the restaurant and you think, oh, first impressions, it's like, and you think, where are the pendants? And they have been hung almost kind of skimming the ceiling. And on the drawings, obviously, you've got the drop, you've got the dimensions. You think, okay, don't worry, it's okay. It's 3 days till launch. There's plenty of time. We can have it dropped, but the cable's been cut, Then, again, I'm laughing, but obviously you want to cry at the time, don't you? Because everyone's going to think you designed that.
Did it on purpose.
I guess just going to a positive. There's been lots of kind of salutary lessons, and it's a tough whole business, isn't it, for us? It's a tough whole business. But I would say that overall, I'm really proud of what we produce in terms of our design. And I just want to be paid well enough for the level of detail, but I don't ever want to go backwards. I actually don't want to do a sort of halfway house design. I don't want to do sketch level joinery drawings and hand it over to a contractor. I don't actually want to do that. So I feel really proud of how far we've come, and the fact that we are taken so much more seriously than we used to as a profession. And we really do give some of the architect firms a run for their money in terms of, I just really think we do. So I think there's lots of positives. It's about, I guess, that catch up, isn't it? It's catch up.
Would you have one piece of advice for designers on working smarter?
Stick to your scope.
Avoid scope creep.
Avoid scope creep. And get yourself a mentor. So I always had somebody that I could go to and ask if I wasn't sure, even to ask the stupid questions. That was always comforting to make sure that, and then it's also people who have done things before, and you're hardly ever going to be reinventing, or you're just reinventing the wheel. So going to someone that's done these things before a lot, and just checking in before you spend hours looking at details for things and then realise that you've drawn the skirting the wrong height or stupid things like that.
Actually, being part of a community and being part of the BOID, that's one of the huge things I value, because we talk. We're friends, we talk. And we all face similar things, don't we, in our businesses? And actually, it's so reassuring to feel that you're not alone.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
Helping each other with solutions or little top tips. I come away every time. You come away, don't you, with I'll try that. That's a good idea. I'll try that. You know.
Yeah. But learning to walk away from clients as well. That's the other thing.
Yes.
I've noticed a lot of people
Yes.
mention that
Yes.
they've fired
Yeah, it's
their
quite
clients.
liberating actually.
And you know,
Yeah.
it's gone the other way.
And do you know what? Actually, it inspires a lot of respect in your team as well, because sometimes it's protecting them too, isn't it? Where possibly the client wouldn't have treated you as the business owner in that way, but they might have. So yeah, we've tended to get a lot of kind of team spirit from those situations when they've realised that we won't put up with certain things. It's rare, isn't it? But sometimes it's very important.
Yeah.
Good on you.
Okay, right. Well, I think we have seriously run out of time.
We have seriously run out of time.
Edit
So
that.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to Matt and Anna for your time today. I think
you're
it's been a really fascinating conversation. I've learnt loads. I always learn loads in these things. And thank you so much for participating.
Well,
Yeah, great
Thank you for having
conversation.
us.
Thanks so much. Been really interesting and not at all depressing.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you too to Havwoods for hosting us here today. It's been wonderful, and the showroom has been a great environment to do this talk. So thank you very much, Havwoods. We do hope you've enjoyed this episode, and please do get in touch on our social channels to share any feedback. The Interior Design Business is a Wildwood Plus production. Thank you very much for listening.